You're listening to the ProcureTech podcast, your weekly show for all that's cooking in the digital procurement space. Yes, we've got the hottest startups, thought leadership, and conversation from visionary industry experts, and definitely no stiff corporate content. I'm your host, James Meads, procurement pro, digital nomad, and ProcureTech fanboy. And now, here's this week's show. Yes, hello and welcome to a rather special edition of the ProcureTech podcast because yes, as you may be able to tell from the background noise, I am at an in-person conference for the first time in almost 2 years, and you can probably tell I'm rather excited to be here. I'm at Procurement Summit in Berlin, and I'm going to be partnering with Procurement Summit to bring some interviews and insights from some of the startups that are exhibiting and pitching here during the event, especially shining a light on some of the less well-known, newer startups that are really starting to establish themselves and grow in the space, to feature a little bit about what they do, what kind of problems they solve, and where they see themselves going in the future. So we're going to be focusing on 3 different groups of startups. We're going to look at 3 startups in the ESG space and risk management space. Then we're going to look at another 3 in the game theory and AI space that heavily rely on that as part of their USP and solution. And then finally, we're going to be looking at 3 different providers that are in the services procurement space, which is also a very, very quickly growing segment of the market. So without any further ado, let's jump into our first round of startup interviews. So my very first guest in the sustainability ESG risk management segment is Tobias Bohnhoff from Shipzero. Tobias, welcome to the show.
Hi James, it's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. So let's just jump in, give us a very quick overview of what it is that you're doing at Shipzero, because you're very much into reducing and evaluating transport emissions, which I think is really important function for everyone going forward as we look towards easy wins with sustainability.
That's definitely correct, and a very emerging field that we are working in. Shipzero is a data platform to track, most importantly, manage and analyze transport emissions for freight buyers. And what we do is basically, first of all, provide a layer of transparency about global supply chains and transport chains, and then dig really deep into the data and find potentials where companies can reduce, by smart decision making, their transport footprint.
And I love what all of these innovations are doing in the CO2 and sustainability space, because I just ideologically am more of a light touch person when it comes to regulation, and I really think that innovation is the best way out of this crisis rather than just trying to tax and ban everything, and this really speaks to that. So how can buyers or how can companies make smarter decisions, and how can software help them to do that, especially when you're thinking perhaps in things like, should you bring something by road or by sea, with multimodal transport decisions, or perhaps thinking about where to place a new production facility or to source new goods from in terms of supply sources? How does this come into play?
Well, I think there are 2 main levers that you can distinguish. One is, of course, that you have now technology in place that allows data sharing between companies. And as you know, the transportation market is really fragmented, so there are a lot of different companies, small companies with not that sophisticated IT structures maybe, and for them it's quite difficult to share information with their partners. There are, of course, other reasons not to do that, but I think there is new technology, cloud, AI, of course, in place that makes it really easy to share this kind of information, and then you have a broader and more granular data set that you can work on. The second topic, of course, if you talk about decarbonization, then you have also the physical technology, so the assets really, or the fuels that are created or powered by renewable energy. And both are coming into place right now. So that is the reason why this segment is super interesting right now. And then in the combination, you can identify basically two ways. One is the incremental optimization, which is in place for quite some years, but not used or fully utilized by the companies as of today. So you can be always more efficient in your processes and in decisions on which transport mode do I choose for a certain trade lane, for example. The other thing is, of course, that you can now simulate the effect of, let's say, putting a battery electric vehicle into place instead of a diesel truck, for example. And then you have a delta that you can really measure and where you can base your decisions, also your investment decisions into and select the suppliers that comply with your climate goals.
So you can not only just measure and compare two different modes of transport or transport from two different geographical locations, you can also look at what would the effect be in terms of CO2 if you switched from a supply chain using diesel trucks to electric trucks, for example.
That's exactly right, and I think that is one of the key elements that becomes more and more interesting because you have some restrictions with new technology. When we talk about battery electric vehicles, for example, you have range, you have payload topics that are quite different to diesel trucks, for example. But you can consider this if you have a granular data stream from, for example, the telematics of the truck, and you can analyze that and say, okay, which kind of transports can I really shift to battery electric vehicles in an economically viable way, and not just out of my conviction that it needs to happen, but we combine basically the need for decarbonization with the business value behind it as well. And if you think about the carbon price that is rising, I think the EU carbon price almost tripled within this year. So you see definitely an effect that is coming into place, and therefore the need for a solution like Shipzero is rising.
And what size of company typically would you need to be able to really see payback for this? Is it based on a company's transportation spend, or is it more based on a company's overall turnover?
Well, if you talk about the overall turnover, I would say that medium-sized companies in the range of 100 million plus revenue are interesting as a customer for us right now.
That's sort of dollars or euro or...
Yes, yes. And we hope, of course, that we can go even lower than that, because once the solution gets more and more efficient, then, of course, also smaller companies can benefit from it. If you talk about other aspects, then I would say it's the industry that matters. For example, if you look at chemicals or the automotive segment, where you know that the core business model of those companies is in danger, or at least really affected by this global decarbonization and transformation, those companies are more likely to act right now, and so that is a really interesting space right now.
If someone was thinking, yes, this is great, but it's not our priority, we'll look at it in 3 to 5 years' time, what would be your answer to them?
My answer would be that starting today has a lot of benefit, because once you set up all these processes, which cannot be done overnight, if you talk about integrating your supply chain partners, for example, that takes some effort, you will definitely benefit a lot from having all this data in 5 years' time. And be way ahead of competition, actually, rather than starting when the last ones get to the point where they recognize that it's necessary to have this data insight level. So my advice would be to start in the earliest time possible. The best day would be yesterday, but today is also a good option.
Yeah, and it goes to the age-old saying, doesn't it, that the best day to start saving for your retirement is the first day of work, but True. The next best day to start doing it is today.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of growth, I mean, you're a pretty young company. So what are your next steps? What are your next challenges or next objectives?
Well, I think transportation is, of course, a global challenge or a global sector. So we need to scale the company to face this problem and play a significant role. My conviction is to have an impact on this topic. We are very specialized, but we want to grow, of course. We are currently focusing on the European market, of course dealing with global transports, but with European customers. And one of the next steps would be, of course, internationalization, and of course the growth of the team with more and more satisfied customers, and then really prove that the system works, and you get not only a benefit on the mission side of savings, but also on the commercial side of savings.
So if anyone out there is looking to optimize and evaluate their transportation emissions and look at the best mode of transport or the best means of transport in terms of fuel when we're looking at renewables, Shipzero is a solution that offers that. Finally, Tobias, if anyone would like to learn more about this or to get in touch with you, where's the best way that they can reach you?
You can reach us at shipzero.com, of course, if you want to have a look at more information and more insights about the tool. And personally, I'm best available on LinkedIn. So simply search for Tobias Bohnhoff and then reach out. I'm happy to discuss.
And we'll link to all of that in the show notes. So Tobias, wish you success for the rest of Procurement Summit. Thank you for joining me on an interview today, and good luck.
Thank you, James.
So I'm now joined by our second startup, who is Harald Nitschinger, CEO of Prewave. Harald, welcome to the ProcureTech podcast, Procurement Summit Special.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks, James, for having us.
And first of all, I have to give you congratulations for winning DPW's Startup Award. So very well done. Tell us what all the hype is about then. What convinced them that you were the best startup among a pitch of over 20 of them, I think?
Yeah. So I mean, at Prewave, we are a startup that offers risk intelligence, helping companies gain more transparency into the risks that are happening and are potentially affecting their supply chains. And I think it's on everybody's mind right now. Yeah, it's a hot topic right now. I mean, there's COVID, there's the Supply Chain Act, the Lieferkettengesetz, and I think our win at DPW is a testament to that. That's just a very hot topic that's on everybody's mind, and I think we have a great solution in that area.
And I think you're definitely right that it's a growing concern among companies. And I think it really speaks to the fact that procurement and supply chain in general is starting to be seen now as more of a profit center rather than an overhead, because solutions like what you do really speak to that, don't they?
Absolutely. I think that's a great trend that you speak to there, that particularly in consumer-focusing companies, the supply chain and the procurement side of things is more and more differentiator. Particularly when we think about in the electric car market, for instance, the consumer is extremely aware about not just, let's say, the CO2 footprint of the product, but also the supply chain sustainability of that product. And that is sort of shown in the way car companies, but really it applies to many other industries as well. Textile, food, of course, come to mind. Are focusing on that area, and I think for good reason. Yeah, it helps them not just avoid risks, but rather it helps them actually with their top line.
So just walk me through then a little bit of what does Prewave do, and how does it add value, or how does it prevent cost with businesses that would typically invest in something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we like to say is that supply chains have never been more complex and intransparent than they are today. Yeah? Large corporations have thousands of suppliers distributed all around the world, and they have a very hard time keeping track of what's actually happening at those suppliers on any given day, or potentially in the past. Yeah? And at Prewave, we worked at this point for more than 8 years, coming from the University of Technology Vienna, building an AI technology to identify precisely those incidents that are critical in supply chains. And here we're talking about things like labor strikes, accidents, pollution, child labor. Those incidents are typically represented in publicly available data, like social media data, news media data, but in the local language of the particular supplier, in Chinese, in Spanish, and it's extremely hard in the department, in the central purchasing department, to keep track of all of those things. And we
almost impossible.
It's basically,
especially if it's in local language.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So if you have a global supply chain, it's impossible to keep track of that, and we close that gap, and we make that information, we put that at the fingertips of the supply chain managers, purchasers, and sustainability officers at those corporations.
So let's just use an example then. Let's say that a textile manufacturer was hit by some child labor scandal in Bangladesh. I mean, these are real examples.
Yep.
You see them all the time. How would that then translate into what Prewave would tell the customer? Because obviously, not only the value to the supply chain, but the brand damage in that case that would do has a massive cost when you think of share price and that type of thing. So how does that then translate into data that they would see in the dashboard?
Absolutely. So let's stick with that example of child labor. Typically, those types of incidents, also pollution and others, they are low. We basically always say they are known locally, but unknown globally. What we mean by that is people in Bangladesh that kind of either work at that factory or maybe are residents or citizens nearby that factory, they know that they are polluting. They know that they have child labor going on there, and they talk about it. And they talk about it on social media, on Facebook and on other platforms. But that information is simply not making its way towards the central purchasing departments, or at least when it does, it comes through NGOs, it comes with a big shitstorm attached to it, and that's when the reputational damage happens. We can close that gap, and actually benchmarking has shown that oftentimes we are able to supply that information months before any other channels are supplying that information to our customers. And that is then, those are months where you can actually solve the problem before it becomes a reputational issue for the company.
So it's like preemptive then before it becomes, like you said, the shitstorm, before it gets really well known and uncovered by an NGO, it's catching it before it gets to that stage.
I would say before the wave, pre-wave.
Very good. So what type of industries then typically? I mean, I guess it has to be industries that are manufacturing something rather than a service industry. But where are you finding typically that there's the most interest for this type of service?
Yeah, of course. So it's manufacturing companies that are business to consumer facing that have the highest interest in that, just from a, as we said, reputational perspective. But then, of course, they are pushing standards down the supply chain. So you have the tier one suppliers in all various industries that are also now basically required to do something. We have the Lieferkettengesetz, the supply chain law.
In Germany.
In Germany, precisely, but something coming along on the EU level as well, maybe next year. So it's really now industry-wide. All companies of a certain size need to do something in that area. And even in services-driven industries, the logistics industry, many of the temporary labor industries, all of that, they also have issues, and those are things that should not be overlooked. They are not as much in focus as manufacturing is in the textile industry, for instance, but it's really across the board where it's of value. Yeah.
So this could also track service industries and also look at factors in developed markets as well as in more emerging countries.
Precisely.
Yeah. How do companies typically deal with things that are further down the supply chain? I mean, you raised a good point. I mean, I won't say it's easy, but it's certainly possible to track your tier ones. But then when you get down to your tier threes, tier fours, how do companies do that?
Yeah, that's one of the major issues right now. And what you need to do is you need to take a focused approach. With one of our largest customers, the Volkswagen Group, for instance, we started mapping the supply chains in 16 critical focus raw materials. And those are materials like copper, aluminium, cobalt, conflict minerals. So not across the board, but rather in very focused, potentially problematic materials. And that's where we are mapping. We're using publicly available supply chain data. We're working with the suppliers in those materials to bring more transparency to those supply chains. And that's actually something that is working quite well, and where we are making great progress also on the mapping front in that areas.
Yeah, and I guess there will necessarily be certain materials that are more risk aligned, and I guess that's where always the strongest focus is going to be when you look at the markets that they're coming from, or how dirty the reputation is of a specific industry. You know, mining is, we all know, has its challenges. Yep. In terms of size of your customer base, are you seeing this more as an enterprise level solution, or are you also seeing sort of mid-market customers gaining an interest in this as well, especially in markets like Germany where they have this new supply chain law coming in?
Absolutely. So we have always positioned ourselves also towards the Mittelstand, so the mid-market in Germany, which is of course quite broad and the very strong foundation of the German economy. We are not at all only targeting the large enterprises with billions in revenues, but rather also the Mittelstand, the medium-sized companies. And actually our business model allows for that. Yeah, it's based primarily around the numbers of suppliers that you want to monitor and screen. And therefore a Mittelstand company typically has less suppliers than a Volkswagen, and therefore the business model scales also to their size as well. Yeah.
That's interesting. So it means that it's still a relatively affordable solution regardless of the size of the company, because you're measuring it on a supplier per supplier basis.
Yeah, precisely.
And what have you thought about Procurement Summit? How do you find the concept and the crowd and the public?
First of all, I think it's great to have an in-person conference. Yeah. After all those almost years being all virtual, I think it's just a great achievement to have an in-person conference, and one that is very professionally executed and organized. And I think that has to be the future, and we hope to see many more of conferences of that level and on that order in the near future. Yeah. But so far we're really happy with the event.
Yeah, I think it's a great concept too, the right mix between startups and more established companies, and a very relaxed atmosphere as well.
Yeah.
So finally, if anyone would like to learn a little bit more about what you do, where is the best place that they can find you to learn more about the solution?
Sure. So if you're interested, please head over to prewave.com. You can actually sign up for the tool for free and start testing it with a limited number of suppliers. And also head over to LinkedIn and follow us there, because that's where we post all of the smaller updates around Prewave as well. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Harald, thank you for joining me and wish you success.
Thanks for having us, James.
So now over to our third and final startup interview in the ESG and risk management space. And I'd like to welcome a bit of a legend in the procurement tech industry, Professor Christian Heinrich from CarbMe. Welcome to the ProcureTech podcast and to Procurement Summit.
Thanks, James. Happy being here, and thanks for the flowers in advance. Nice being here.
So, Christian, walk me through the different scopes, because I saw your pitch yesterday and it walked through scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3 when it comes to CO2 measurements and reduction. And I guess, myself included, a lot of people out there wouldn't necessarily know what that means when they hear it for the first time.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I try to give a kind of a high-level intro. What does CO2 reduction mean, and especially what kind of impact does it have for procurement? Because in the beginning, in the first moment, every procurement expert would not really think, okay, what should I do with the CO2 topic? I have a CFO, I have a sustainability department who is taking care about that, but I have to deal with a lot of other more important things like shortages, like supply chain quality and other topics. So right now, the topic is that we have scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3, and all together is the overall emission of your company. And if your company decides to become net zero in, for example, 2030 or 25, then you need to aim for that. And if you want to become net zero, you need to pay your emissions. So either you do it via offsetting fees, so planting trees or investing in projects like that, or you have to pay certificates. And this costs money, and the carbon costs increase year by year because regulations increase regarding that. So this means we have 3 scopes, and scope 1 and scope 2 is the easiest way to reduce and the fastest. So you get the easy quick wins. For example, for your production you need energy, or in your office you have energy, light, heating, etc. And if you just change the traditional energy provider with a green energy provider, you could already realize and gain savings. This means emission reductions. But, and this is the big but, in scope 3 there are the 80% of the overall emissions, and those are the big impact CO2 emission drivers, and you need to reduce it. And right now we come to procurement, scope 3, and the 80% game for production manufacturing companies are in the procurement. So this means procurement and logistics will have, and some already realized that, the others will get it on the table next year, that they have to start thinking about reducing the emissions. And before reducing that, they need to identify and have a transparency how much emissions do I have in my supply chain. Later on, I am then able to collaborate, negotiate, or use this for negotiations in the supplier relationships. But before that, I need to identify how can I master my 80% challenge, and this will be up to the CPOs.
And that 80% challenge, so let's assume then that companies have got the easy wins by looking at things like energy efficiency in the production plant and making their waste and their scrap more recyclable and that type of thing that most companies are aware or have an active program to do, or at least the bigger ones. Where would procurement then start off in terms of looking at this scope 3? I mean, transportation, I guess, is a big one, but is it also around the recyclability and the reusability of the materials in the end product as well?
It heavily depends. So I would rather focus on decreasing the 80% challenge from a procurement perspective, first of all, with getting transparency regarding my categories. We call it then the CO2 hotspots. For example, let's assume we have 50 categories in the procurement organization. There are some categories who are overall in industry independent, very, very emission oriented. For example, packaging, logistics, because logistics is always a topic, but there are also industry relevant topics like alu, steel, aluminium, steel, or also plastics. So this heavily depends. So first of all, you need to identify, for example, you have 50,000 suppliers. You need to identify who are the 300 suppliers who have the biggest impact, and then I can focus on my 300. So I would not send out emails to all 50,000 suppliers, and I would really not send them out from a sustainability department, because then negotiation is not in the loop. And we need to connect the process between sustainability department and procurement in order to empower the procurement leaders, the category managers, to use this information for their negotiations and the RFPs in the next days.
And I guess it's targeting those suppliers that can really work with you in a partnership to do something about that. I mean, I always use the classic example of me as a small business wanting to be a new vendor as a consultant to a big company, and they ask me things about what are my sustainability and diversity policies. Well, I don't have one. I'm a one-person business. So there is always that pragmatism that needs to be considered, isn't there?
100% yes, and it's very often the Pareto principle. So if you really would kind of shoot on every supplier, you would also stress your organization too much. So it's really more important that you identify the hotspots and then you start a collaboration. And it's also not about replacing your existing supplier. It's rather, how can I track down my emissions together with my existing supplier over the next years? Yeah, how can I make it transparent to this person or this supplier that they need to work according to the targets, but we need to do this together. And this is also, and I'm honest, only possible with a one-on-one direction. So I would not like to talk about this kind of myths, that we have a end-to-end transparency. Yeah, you can try it, but honestly, we are all long enough in the game. If I have a one-on-one collaboration and can push it to my next partner, and this one can push it to the next partner, we have solved a lot.
So I think the case is clear in terms of how you would tackle this, in terms of Paretoing it and sort of fishing out the suppliers that can make the biggest impact. What's the business case or the ROI to use software like CarbMe to tackle this? What specific problem does it solve?
Yeah. At the end, kind of 3 steps. Beginning, getting transparency, then identifying the CO2 hotspots, and then tracking down via collaboration the emissions, and then you save penalties and you save costs regarding certificates, and you reach your net zero targets earlier. So that's the result. So you save then at the end the penalties when you become net zero, or when you have to become net zero, or when you are not an OEM, and you are, for example, tier 1 or tier 2, then you get the push from your OEM. So you need to show this, you need to show the transparency, that's the one thing. And why do you need software? I think this was the hidden part in your question. Without software, you start sending emails and you do never have precise data, even if you kind of have 100 consultants, let's say, who try to calculate the footprints of the products and of the value chain connections, but it's simply not feasible to do this manually, because we match environmental databases with your transactions from your ERP and SRM system, and this process is automated, and this empowers you not to send emails via the sustainability department. Instead of that, really work directly with the CO2 hotspots and track that down over the years.
So it's both the data, it's having a single source of truth, and it's also being able to get you to where you need to go faster, and therein it saves you money because you're avoiding fines.
Exactly. So from a technical perspective, there are two layers, process automation and the data automation. That's the analytical layer and the transaction layer. And then we have the dashboard layer to track that down over the years. And with the dashboard layer, for sure, you reduce the costs, or at the end, you avoid the cost. I would not even speak, even if we are in procurement, about cost reduction. It's really more a cost avoidance, which is very good if you can do that.
And it's the dirty word that finance hates, isn't it? Cost avoidance. I'm a real evangelist of cost avoidance. I think it drives a huge amount of hidden value. But in terms of industry sectors, where are you seeing the hotspots? I mean, I guess anything that is very capital intensive and emissions intensive.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for sure, that's clear. The automotive industry already changed the business model. I do not talk too much about that. But also the machine building, the tier 1s, the tier 2s regarding the automotive, machine building industry, but also pharmaceutical industry, chemical industry, and logistics industry. Companies like Maersk, like Schenker, they have to report their track down emissions also to their clients like IKEA, like Unilever. And that's a real big thing. But also, and that's something I like to mention because I had a discussion yesterday, the SMEs maybe will never have to buy any certificates, but they got the pressure and will get the pressure from their OEMs.
From their customers, yeah. So if anyone would like to find out a little bit more about what you're doing, where is the best place to get hold of you and learn more about the solution?
Yeah, first of all, on our website, carpme.com, you can also book slots with me. So just contact us, and there you get access to my calendar, not for every day, but for the afternoon sessions I have almost every day 3 hours. But you can also just simply contact me via LinkedIn. You find me with Christian Heinrich, or send me an email, christianheinrich@carpme.com.
And I will link to all of that in the show notes. Christian, thank you very much for joining me and telling us more about your pretty new company, which is growing quickly from what I gather, and wish you success for the rest of the time here at Procurement Summit.
Thanks a lot. Pleasure talking to you. And let's decarbonize the world.
So that rounds off episode 1 in our 3-part series here from Procurement Summit in Berlin. We'll be back next week with episode 2, where we'll be featuring 3 startups that are in the AI and game theory space with their solutions that they offer. If you're interested to check out more about Procurement Summit, just go to procurementsummit.de to find out all about the conference. And if you like this show, then don't forget to subscribe in your favorite podcast player, where you will get notifications every time we release a new episode. Until next week, take care and speak to you then. Bye for now.